pumped to be here. It doesn't seem like a year since we last met, but it's been pretty much 365 days. I know this because last year at this time, when the conference started, my wife and I just welcomed to the world our new baby girl, Isla, and today it's her birthday. So I know that we're 1 year. Um, anyway, this is a lot of fun for me, and I'm so happy to see a good turnout here for the opening remarks, and really excited to introduce to you Susan Holt, our LEARNEast keynote this year. So Jeff, if you want to take us through a few of the housekeeping things, and then I will do the honors. It is my honor to introduce Susan, so I'll let you just take care of a few of those things first.
Absolutely, and thank you, Matt, and thank you, Susan. Yeah, so just a few housekeeping, as Matt said. First of all, the keynote's going to be at 9 or right when we're done here. There are sessions throughout the day, 9:45, at 11, at 1:30, and 2:45. And if you go to the LEARNEast website page, the learneast.ca, and link through the 2021 session tab, you'll see them all there. And the actual link to each of the Teams meetings is the name of the session itself. So there's no big long Teams meeting, so just embed it right into the name. So just click on the link that you want to go to and it will take you to that Teams meeting and you can go right in there. We're excited also at 1 o'clock, and Matt's going to talk a little bit more about it later, obviously, but we're going to unveil our Anglophone West School District Digital Responsibility Toolkit. We think this is a great new initiative to help real practical tools for classroom teachers to be able to start teaching digital literacy and citizenship. And then at 3:50, after the last session, we're going to have a closing. We've got a ton of door prizes and really great stuff from a lot of great partners, and so we're excited about that. You don't have to be in attendance to win, and throughout the day, as you go to a session, you will be able to fill in your name. There'll be a link at each session at the end of it. You can go there, say you were at that session, and away you go. So the links, as I said, were at learneast.ca. We're going to ask that if you're in a session, please keep your mics off, and you can turn your camera on or off if you wish. But if you do have questions, and we encourage you to have questions, please just put them into the chat on the side, and we will have some of our LEARNEast digital learning team from ASD-W monitoring that chat and helping out the presenters and facilitating that discussion. So if you do have questions, that's where we're asked you to put them. And all sessions today are going to be in Microsoft Teams meetings. I'm a conference junkie. I used to go to conferences like a gazillion conferences a year. And at those conferences, they always say, it's a rule of 2 feet. If you're in a session and it's not giving you what you want, get up, go to another session. Go find something that is giving you what you want. Don't feel bad if you're a presenter and somebody leaves. It's not on you. It's just it wasn't a good fit. Here today we have the rule of 3 clicks because we're in a virtual environment. So if you're in a session and it's not quite giving you what you want, click out, go find something else. There's always good stuff. So we've got 6 different sessions going on at any one session period. So go and find that. Really excited to let you know too, this is something new this year, the Neil Squire Society. So I don't know if you don't know about the Neil Squire Society, you should. As a classroom teacher with technology, you're all working with kids who have special needs or need some kind of assistive tech, and we're seeing more and more of it in schools. These guys are the specialists in assistive technology. They do a great job. And so today, what they have got set up is a virtual kiosk. And if you go to that first, the LEARNEast page and go to the 2021 sessions, at the top of that page, before you see all the sessions listed below, you're going to see a link that's going to take you to their virtual kiosk. So at any point in the day today, they're going to be there from 8:30 to 4. I just popped over there and saw them. They're really excited to be doing this. So if you have a question about assistive technology and how you can use it, or you've got a student coming into your class this year and you're not quite sure about what you can do to help them, by all means, drop by and see Neil Squires, to the folks from Neil Squire today. They are amazing. They do great work, and they can really change your life and help you help students. And so It's not that they're not accessible all year round, but they're there today, and they're more than willing to help you. And they'll also be able to link with you and help you throughout the school year as well. So just go to the conference page, find their link. It's again right in the sessions page, and it's right at the top of that page. It's the first. Then just click on the Nielsen Squire Society virtual kiosk. It will take you right into that Teams meeting, and they're sitting there today between 8:30 and 4. As I said, prizes. Every session in the text chat, there's going to be a link. Go in there once per session. We'll trust you. Prizes will be drawn at the end of the closing session. You don't have to be here to win, because you're going to fill out a little ballot, and for every session you attend, fill out a ballot. Tell us if you were in that session. And there's a bunch of headsets and wearables, and really we've got a bunch of great stuff from a bunch of great people. If you're talking about the experience today, and you're on social media. Social media hashtag is LearnEast, hashtag LearnEast, and that goes across any platform, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever else you're using. So please use the hashtag LearnEast, and we're excited to be able to track all that stuff and pull it all together and know what you're saying about us and find out what you're saying about us. Our program partners, we couldn't do this conference without some really great support from some great organizations who put on sessions for us. As I said, Neil Squire Society, but also Gaia Project, Media Smarts, Microsoft, Brilliant Labs, Kids Code Jeunesse, Logix Academy. These are all people, and of course Smart. These are all organizations and people that we partner with throughout the year, but they also help us out at LearnEast, and they're all online today, and they're going to have some great sessions for you as well. Our supporters, these are people who support us in many different ways, primarily through some of those crazy great package gifts that you're going to be eligible to win at the end. ASD-W, Covey, MBTA, 3D Datacom, Brunnet, and so these are all great people that we work with during the school year. So that's about it. If you need to go to the washroom during a session, don't need to raise your hand, just go. One of the things that I should remind you of is that every session today is being recorded, and we will put those sessions up on the LearnEast website. You'll notice that if you go to the LearnEast website, last year's sessions are all still sitting there. You can watch those. This year's sessions will be up there in the next week or so. I got to download them and upload them again to YouTube and do a bunch of other stuff. But we do catalog and archive all of our sessions. So if something's really great and you want to watch it again, or you want to share it with a colleague, those links will all be there in the next week or two. So, 8:56. Matt, it's back to you, my friend.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, great. Did we mention that we're excited here yet? We're excited. We're excited for a new school year dawned upon us. We're excited that we have almost 40 people on the call already at 8:56 in the morning, and we haven't gotten started yet. And we're excited for Susan Holt because she is going to kick us off. She is amazing. So it's my pleasure to introduce Susan Holt. She's our keynote for LearnEast 2021. She's not only a rock star community leader, she's also my neighbor, and that means a lot to me. And yes. So as I said, Susan's a rock star. In 2010, she was recognized as one of Atlantic Canada's top 50 emerging leaders and led the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce to become the go-to voice for business issues in the province. She's also a former president and CEO of the New Brunswick Business Council. Susan made the jump from the private sector to the nonprofit sector after more than a decade of working around the world, from Toronto and Ottawa to Australia and India, for well-known technology leaders such as Xerox, HP, IBM, and Research in Motion, all this in sales, human resources, and management roles. She served as a board member for several community organizations, including the Harvest Jazz and Blues Festival, the Playhouse, and the New Brunswick Lung Association. Susan's current roles are Chief Growth Officer at PQA and Plato Testing, thank you, Canada's only Indigenous-led and staffed software testing company, and we're excited about that. In addition to these accolades and experiences, we're especially interested in Susan sharing more about her passion for STEM outreach for youth as a board director of Actua. They're a national nonprofit that promotes science and technology experiences for youth, particularly girls, Indigenous, remote, and hard-to-reach kids. So today, Susan is going to explore how we can create space for authentic connections through technology and how to sustain inclusive connectivity between all students. I'm excited. Please join me in welcoming our 2021 keynote, Susan Holt.
Thanks a ton, Matt. That's a lovely introduction. And I'm really excited to be here. So thanks to you and to Jeff for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Love the chance to talk about what we're doing at Plato, a bit about what Actua does. So a couple things. Well, and first I'll also say I'm really nervous. I do a lot of presenting, but talking about education to educators is super nerve-wracking and daunting. So let me say up front, I'm not an educator or a trained education professional. So I'm going to share a little bit about what the organizations I work with have done in the hopes that it can inform some conversation and some thinking. I should start first by acknowledging that I am coming to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqey people, the people of the beautiful river. And for those of you who aren't in and around the capital city, the beautiful river is the Wolastoq or the St. John River. And we're home to the Sitansisk First Nation and a number of others. So I want to take a moment to just recognize the elders who have shepherded this land for centuries so that I can sit here and speak to you with some version of daylight coming through my window. And Matt has already introduced me, so I'd like to jump right in. My plan for this morning is to talk a little bit about PQA and Plato, just to give you the context of the organizations. Then I want to talk about what Plato does in terms of our training program for Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people across Canada, the model of how it works. And then I want to talk about this past year and the changes that we made to the model and how we delivered a blended technology education program to folks, and talk a little bit about what we've learned about teaching in an inclusive way with a classroom of particular folks. And then I'm going to, hopefully I won't have rattled on for too long and we'll have time for questions. I don't know if Jeff covered it, but my preference is two ways. You can raise your hand and I'll do my best to be watching for hands raised. If you have questions, I encourage you to jump in when you have the question as opposed to waiting for a break, or put your question in the chat. Either way, I'll watch for the hands and I'll watch for the chat questions as well. I had been thinking I was going to have a poll functionality in this. I don't, so I'm going to try and attempt an alternate version of a poll at one point. That may or may not work, but if you have your hands near your keyboard, at some point I'll ask you a question and ask you to put a number into the chat just to give me a sense of what kind of models you guys are working in. And I think that that's it from a logistics perspective. So I'll jump right in. So some of you may or may not know about PQA and Plato testing. So I'm going to go right back to the start in 1997 when a young man named Keith McIntosh had studied computer science at UNB and then went off to work in the IT sector and worked, I think he was in Ottawa at the time, doing software testing. And Frank McKenna had been premier and had been building up a call center industry in New Brunswick. And Keith thought that he wanted to bring value-added jobs that had good paying salaries in IT to New Brunswick and to his neighbors and to his friends. And so he moved back home from Ottawa and started a software testing services company called PQA, or Professional Quality Assurance. Started delivering those services using an old piece of technology called Mercury for the government and for other clients. Actually won some business from Apple on a cold call. And the company has been operating for the last 24 years. And so it really started in Keith wanting to bring jobs to his neighbors and to folks in this province. So now we're going to jump forward to 2015. In 2015, Keith applied and was accepted to something called the Governor General's Canadian Leadership Conference. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's run every couple years. They invite applicants from all sort of sectors, private sector, public sector, government, military, unionized, non-unionized, you name it. They get a semi-diverse group of type A's together. And they bring them all together and then send them out into groups of about 18 to different parts of Canada for a couple weeks to experience that region. And then they bring them back together again to talk about what they observed and learned. So Keith was put on a bus with about 18 other people and sent to Montreal and the Eastern Townships in the summer of 2015. I think they started off with a fancy dinner at the Power Corp headquarters. So Power Corp, one of Canada's largest corporations, they were having dinner with the CEO, Paul Desmarais. And in Keith's words, it was on China so fine he could, see through his cup of tea to the person on the other side. And just having lots of conversations about the country and what was happening in Canada at the time. The next day, the conference sent them to Ganawage, and they went to a school where they were teaching Mohawk children between K to 6. They were teaching them the Mohawk language. So as Keith describes it, they were on this big fancy tour bus that pulled up into the school grounds, and he gets off the bus and the school doors open and the kids come running out. And the first thing that Keith notices is the smell. And he learns from the staff that the smell is the water. It has a strong sulfuric smell. He learns that they can't drink it. He sees water fountains that have been taped off with caution tape. And so he's taking this in, these kids' faces and the smell, and he can see the skyline of Montreal in the distance because Ganawage is on a sort of not an island, but an outcrop that gets a good view of Montreal. And like he can see the Power Corp building and in the distance. And so that's when it really struck him, the systemic disadvantage that First Nations and Inuit and Métis people have faced in this country for a very long time. And Keith did what I think many of us would do. He thought, well, how do I help? What can I do? He was running a software testing company and was having a hard time finding labor. And Indigenous populations were younger and growing faster at a rate, I think, 4 times faster than the rest of the Canadian population, and were significantly underemployed or unemployed. So Keith thought, why don't I train First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in software testing and hire them, and that'll, address some of my talent shortage issues and try to break down some barriers to equitable participation of Indigenous people in IT. And at the time, he was on the bus with a gentleman named Denis Carignan, who is a Cree gentleman from the Pasqua First Nation in Saskatchewan, but who was also working in the Maritimes for Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. And he told Denis his idea, and Denis said, "Oh, that sounds amazing. Let me know when you get it going. I'll come work for you." And I remember when he came home back to Fredericton that year, and he and I had lunch at Caribbean Flavas, and he told me about it, and I said something similar. Right? I said, "Wow, that's a great idea. Good luck. It sounds really hard." But Keith, being Keith, within a matter of months, he had partnered with JEDI and the Collège Communautaire Nouveau-Brunswick, and they built an Indigenous software tester training course that he launched in September of 2015. And by January of 2016, Plato, professional Aboriginal testing organization, had its first employees. And so we've been doing this ever since. Denis came to work for Keith in 2016, and I came to join him in 2019. And so that's really the origin story of Plato. I want to pop up. Let me see if I can do this. Just a quick. Is it going to let me share this? If I go here and then here. I'm hoping that means that you guys can now all see this. If someone can give me a thumbs up or a confirmation.
We can see it, Sue.
Excellent, because I've lost my little. Oh, that's what I want. Okay, so here's a couple quick stats on Plato. We've run 15 courses. We've trained not quite 200 Indigenous students from 50 different communities across Canada. We did start in Fredericton and in partnership with JEDI and in the Miramichi, and we've since trained in Vancouver and Sault Ste. Marie and Regina and Calgary and Edmonton and Toronto. We've delivered more than, these numbers are as of December of 2020, so more than 2,300 months of full-time employment and over $7 million in salaries to the students that we hire. So I want to highlight 2 things. The work is based on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, and specifically call to action number 7, which is really focusing on eliminating education and employment gaps between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians. And then more directly, call to action number 92, section 2, which specifically asks that the corporate sector ensure that Aboriginal people have equitable access to jobs, training and education opportunities in the corporate sector. And that call to action goes on to reference equitable and benefit from economic development projects as well. So the calls to action really were part of the reason why Plato was founded and inform the work that we're doing today. So let me talk a little bit more in detail about what that work is and how we have it modeled. Hopefully I've just successfully closed that. We start by recruiting all students. So we go to communities, we partner with educational training officers, we partner with different groups that support Indigenous communities, Métis Nation organizations, that kind of thing. We interview all students, so we ask them for a resume, we interview everybody, and then really we're looking for a couple key traits. One is an interest in technology, right? That interest and desire to learn is really going to be indicative of their success in the course. We do look for some basic numeracy and literacy skills so that they can get through the content and that we have a sense that they have some of the aptitudes required to be successful. And then we assess their ability to be successful based on community supports. So I'm sure some of you have encountered this with students that you've taught in the past, but it's not very likely for our students to have any IT role models in their community or in their world. Probably not a family member who has an IT job, or at least not right now. The percentage of Indigenous people employed in the tech sector is very, very low. And so because we're putting them through a course of new information and new learning where they're not going to have community role models, we're looking to understand what kind of supports they have, really more emotional supports to complete the program consistently. Is there somebody at home that's supportive, or is there somebody that's likely not supportive of them taking this time right now? So those are the things that we assess for. Somebody is not muted.
And prettiest cocktail with the coolest name. If you make any noise over 60 dB decibels, you must pour anything you've prepared into the bucket.
I'm so sorry. Over 100 decibel.
No.
Again, shout. I love.
Am I the only person who can hear that?
Over.
Okay.
I got it. Sorry, I got it.
No,
Wasn't
no
me,
worries.
but I got it.
Thank you. I was getting wrapped up in what are the decibels that this lovely British voice is talking about. Okay, so we that's how we assess students. We look for curiosity, technology, as well as a significantly or appropriately supportive infrastructure that they can be successful undertaking a 5-month course and a 3-month internship and getting to the other side. We've learned over time that support at home doesn't have to be directly at home, but within the community, somebody that's going to be there encouraging them to come back to class the next day and to keep at it even though it's hard has really made a difference in the success of our students. So we've learned how to assess for those family supports or those local supports. So the students participate in a 5-month class. The class is broken up into a morning of theory and content and an afternoon of hands-on sort of exercise and learning. And then they do a 3-month internship with one of our clients where they're actually doing the work of software testing. And at the end of those 8 months, if they've completed, then we offer them a full-time job with benefits, minimum salary of $40K at least, and the chance to dig into an IT career. And the model that we have in the classroom is there's 2 people that support a class. So we have an instructor and a subject matter expert. The instructor's responsibility is classroom management, making sure that the modules and the structure of the course are achieving the students' needs, working one-on-one to assess the students' learning. The subject matter expert is a software tester, a senior software tester who knows the content really well, and they work as a in the afternoons mostly to support the students through the assignment. So they answer technical questions, they clarify the content that way. And the two work hand in hand. And in this case, we also had a second subject matter expert in our most recent class, and so I'll talk a little bit about that. Normally, we deliver in a classroom. So for, I think, 14 of the 15 classes we've run, there have been 15 students in a classroom, typically in a U-shape, engaged with an instructor and subject matter expert, guest speakers coming in to talk about their experience in software testing, going on visits to clients to get a sense for the environment they're going to be working in, that kind of thing. Obviously, that all changed last year, and we moved to a blended model. So we launched 2 classes with one team, a group in Regina and a group in Saskatchewan, Sault Ste. Marie, much smaller groups. I think there was maybe 6 in one and 8 in the other. The instructor was in person in Sault Ste. Marie with a subject matter expert, and then there was an in-person subject matter expert in Regina. So the instructor started off teaching to 6 remote students in Regina and 8 in person in Sault Ste. Marie. And then partway through that course, during lockdowns, moved to all 14 students fully remote. And then at various times, because of people's personal circumstances, either with COVID or other, he would have students at home remotely, students in Regina or students in Sault Ste. Marie in person. So the structural model that they set up in a Teams environment was that every student had a desk that faced the front and had a laptop on it with a camera on, and so that all students were getting the same visual experience, and the instructor was teaching mostly to a camera that had students behind it. So that's how the learning went when it was both blended with folks at home, as well as just blended between the 2 cities. So I want to take a quick, so we call that a blended synchronous model, where you have remote and in-person students, but everybody learning at the same time or consuming the content at the same time. I am curious to know what kind of models that the folks here have taught in. So I'm just going to try to put up this poll and wondering if you could enter a number into the chat to tell me whether you've done all students in person, all students remote, a blended synchronous model like I've described, maybe a blended asynchronous model where your remote students are on a different sort of time or schedule, or your in-person students are, or something else entirely that I haven't described. So I'm hoping that folks can put a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 into the chat. Thank you, Winnie, right on the ball, all things. Yeah, so lots of folks doing all in person, a little bit of all remote, a little bit of a blended asynchronous. I had the impression that the high school model was mostly a blended asynchronous, where students who weren't in class were doing something slightly different. Okay. Right. Thank you for that. At some point I'll figure out how to do a poll in Teams when it doesn't give me the 3 little dots, and then we could maybe better see percentages. But it looks like the vast majority are used to teaching all students in person, with a few different folks having some experience with blended synchronous or asynchronous. So lots of different challenges come from that kind of model. I'm going to focus a little bit on what we learned from having done that, as well as just talking a little bit about what we've learned generally in terms of teaching Indigenous learners and other things. So, and I will say this is big thanks to a gentleman named John Howes, who is our instructor, who's taught our classes in Sault Ste. Marie and Calgary over the last little bit, and he is an educator, has a degree in education, and has specific sort of classroom and teaching experience, both in the north and in provincial school systems. So John told me what was most important for him in successfully navigating teaching through Teams with people in person and remotely. One was to know the technology, right? He really benefited from the investment he made in getting familiar with the system we were using, which was Teams, actually. So we looked at D2L platforms and Canvas and a variety of other learning platforms, but chose Teams at the time. So he got really familiar with all the different sort of bells and whistles of Teams and breakout rooms and muting and chat management and hand raising and all sorts of things, how he could run polls, how he could do different things with the technology so that didn't become a barrier to him delivering content and being able to assess students smoothly. He said the other thing that he learned that I think most of you who will have done any form of remote, and as Jeff demonstrated in the notes that he shared with me, is to set the ground rules and set the norms right up front and early about whether it's camera on or camera off, whether, how you ask questions and how you engage, what the expectation is for leaving and joining and that kind of thing. And so setting those consistently across all of our students, whether in Regina or Sault Ste. Marie or at home, and then sticking with them to provide that kind of structure, he found really helpful and will do again since we're planning another blended class. The next piece of learning that John shared with me, it was a trial and error learning, I guess. He learned not to silo the learners by type of learning or type of learning environment, I guess. He said at first, when he was assigning group exercises and group work, he would have remote students work with remote students and in-person students work with in-person students. Seemed kind of logical that if you had people in person, you would get them to work with each other in person, and the same with the folks in person in Regina. And he learned over time that wasn't the best way to go because it really did sort of silo the class, and he didn't want to differentiate between remote learners and in-person learners and have one experience be less than the other. So he started actively making sure that the teams were blended between both physical locations as well as both model, so that because everyone had a laptop and a piece of equipment that was provided to them by the company, right? We sent out laptops to everybody. We ensured that they had the kind of internet access that would allow them to participate in the course smoothly. He really just made sure that every time there was a group exercise, it had people from different locations and different learning models, so that remote at home or individual learners weren't at any disadvantage and felt as included and connected to the class as the learners who were in person. Which brings me to another point that he said was really critical, was he increased the number of group exercises and group tasks for this kind of learning environment significantly and relied more on peer learning models and peer supports. Some of that really helped increase the social cohesion of the class, but it was also because in that model, it was very hard for him to get close to all of the learners. And so he had some students who were very observant, very keen, and who would provide him with feedback that he wasn't always able to get directly about students that might have been struggling with a particular concept or a particular issue, to let John better manage the class. So he said he really focused partway through on designing effective group exercises and making sure the mix of the team participating in the group exercises incorporated those different folks. He started also doing two other things. One with the Teams tech, he learned the importance of the need for private one-on-one conversation space. And so he set up, I think, a whole bunch of different rooms that were sort of coded so that each student had a place they could go and engage with the teacher, with John, that was private and that was off sort of camera from the rest of the class. So if they had questions that they weren't comfortable asking in that group, or if they had the need to have that kind of conversation, having those private rooms ready and available that you could jump into from one part of Teams to another part of Teams to support that student, he said was really helpful and something he'd do again. And then he also said they really got in the habit of creating space for personal and social connection at the beginning and at the end of each day. Because certainly in our environment, and I'll talk more about this at the end, the students support each other in their learning. And once the course is done and they're on internship, they really support each other and to be successful through their internships. And then once they're our employees, that connection also helps them really stick with the hard early days of learning something new and doing a new job in a new environment. And so building that social connection really helped folks show up to class consistently, helped them lean on each other more, which also helped him as an instructor not have the full burden of, supporting 15 students individually. So he highlighted for me, those were his do-agains, right? Figure out the private conversation space so he could engage one-on-one with students as they needed, make time for social, not to silo the learners by location or model, and to really emphasize the group exercise piece. I'm going to put up a quick photo just for the fun of it. These were the before times. So this is a picture of our first class that we held in Regina. They're actually at the University of, is it the University of Saskatchewan? University of Regina, actually. And so they're sitting in a U. They've all got their computers, but they do have an instructor at the front of the class that you can't see. And they're keen and they're ready to go. That was the model that we started at first. That class has now graduated. We've run a second class in Regina. We're just on the cusp of running a third. But this is, like I say, we've had to change to accommodate folks in other locations and folks working from home. So now I want to jump into some of the learnings that we've had from a specifically sort of inclusive lens, or in this case, because we're teaching First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Students, maybe I'll pause for a quick sec because I know I've been rambling, just to make sure that if anybody wanted to ask a question, I haven't missed any hands or missed any questions in the chat. I think I only have maybe 6 minutes left, so I'm going to jump right into 15 years or 15 courses and 6 years of teaching Métis and Inuit and First Nations people as a non-Indigenous sort of person, or in John's case, none of our instructors have been Indigenous. There's certainly a number of things we learned. One, I think I flagged at the outset, is we obviously have the benefit of being able to select our students and to assess their readiness for the course, as well as their ability to be successful based on the support systems that they have back in community. We've learned that that's critical. But we've also learned how important it is to really know those external teams and resources. So in every community and city where we've launched a course, we've identified things like the Native Friendship Center or the Indian Friendship Center, or whichever friendship center or organization that might exist that provides those kinds of supports. We get to know who the educational officers are and the training and development officers. Often we get to know the chiefs and counselors. We learn what mental health resources are available, so that we can support students in navigating some of the resources available to them in community as the course progresses and students experience different things and express different needs, that we can try to orient them to the appropriate resources. And this is a piece that I'm really interested in understanding from you guys, if I can. We have learned over time the importance of keeping people together, keeping like with like, which I'm not sure if that's how the school system operates, but we started off by sending each one of our students to an internship on their own. So, a single Indigenous new software tester into a client. And we learned right away that did not work very well, or certainly didn't work as well as when we sent 2 students to an internship together, which didn't work as well as when we sent 3 students to an internship together. Once we sent groups of 4 or 5, we didn't notice a difference between 3, 4, or 5, but we noticed a significant improvement with a pair of students together versus 1, and a little bit more improvement with 3 students versus 2. So I don't know how the school system in New Brunswick sort of looks at diversity of a classroom and assigns or figures out what students to put in which class. But I would certainly say that we've observed that when we put an individual Indigenous person into an internship in this is corporate Canada, so it is inevitably majority white. This is the IT sector, so it is majority male. It's extremely rare for them to be working in even a building, not to mention a floor or a team with any other Indigenous people around. And so that becomes very challenging for certainly if they're trying to establish an identity as an Indigenous IT professional with no role models in their environment, no role models in the workplace, and nobody around them who understands their cultural context or background as they're trying to do something new with new information. We just found that the likelihood of success was low. But when you paired them with a buddy or a team of three, that gave the sense of security and confidence, the ability to not be the only person who looks like me in, the room or in the chat or in the scrum or on the floor at the lunchroom. It made a huge difference in the students' ability to be successful in the internship. So it made me really curious as to how the school districts or whoever assigns students group typically minority students with other minority students so that they won't be the only kid who looks like me in that classroom. We found it made a significant difference in the students' success. So that was one. The other piece that John talked about is he never prompted specifically Indigenous discussions, and for us he didn't have to. I guess the students developed through his efforts around social connection at the beginning and end of each class, and their teamwork together. They started to build the kind of trust with each other that they started raising and wanting to talk about, whether it was Orange Shirt Day would come and go and, how the class would talk about that, or whether it was personal circumstances that they experienced, things that were happening in their community, or whether more recently it's been things like the discovery of the children and the children's bodies from the residential school system. We've had corporate, like company-wide gathering circles with Denis to create space for folks to talk about that. But John said in the class he didn't ever lead or prompt those discussions, just created space where anybody could talk about anything they wanted, and sort of cultural conversations and how people were coping with the either racism that they were experiencing or other things emerged naturally. And so I think I only have a minute left, which means I've gone over. What's next for us? We're actually going to stick with a blended model. We're running a joint Sault Ste. Marie Regina class. Some of the students will be remote by nature of personal experience. We're going to attempt our first fully remote class in the months ahead and see how we can recreate these spaces and group exercises and social connection points that will support the students' success in the program. And I think I'll finish with a quick pop-up of Shawnee, one of my colleagues here in, where is it going to give me? This one. And in the meantime, you guys can either raise your hands or type in a question. Hopefully you can see that. Oh, and there's Shawnee. So Shawnee is here in our Fredericton office. She's from the Woodstock First Nation. She says she feels more connected to her culture by working with, to feel like it's recognized and celebrated. And she's become a real leader in our company and is now leading a team of testers on a project with a client that's based in the UK and has developers in Portugal and doing work for an organization in the US. So our goal is to train and break down the barriers for 1,000 Indigenous software testers to emerge across the country. And ideally, we reach a point of equitable participation of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in IT. I'm 1 minute over, Jeff. Matt, I'm sorry, but I'm kind of hoping there might be some comments or questions at this point.
Absolutely. Lots of time for questions and comments if anyone wants to jump in now. Here's one from Jeff Whipple.
So there isn't a minimum educational requirement. We ask for things like a high school diploma or a GED or equivalent life experience, I think is how we word it, because we have people who've come to us, 30, 40, 50 years old, have worked in the military, have done other things, but perhaps didn't complete high school or didn't complete a GED. So Really, we're just looking, we try to assess some numeracy and literacy to make sure that there aren't barriers to consuming the content, but there isn't a formal educational minimum. You see expanding to house more students per course per year. That's a great question. Thank you, Crystal. Our plan for this second blended course was to increase the student number from 15 to 24. So our hopes were that we would have 12 students in Regina and 12 students in Sault Ste. Marie, and that those would at times those 12 groups of 12 students may end up working from home or otherwise, depending on the circumstances of the pandemic or their personal circumstances. So that's based on our instructor, because we trialed the first blended model with him, and then he expressed that he thought that he could manage 24 learners with 2 subject matter experts, so one with the 12 in Regina and one with the 12 in Sault Ste. Marie. He thought 24 was probably the max that he could manage successfully. We'll see once we get through this round if he tells us he can do more. Although we also like the dynamic in the cohort to be enough that it really feels like family. So we're also interested in the students' feedback if 24 starts to get too big to create the tight ties between students. I'd be really interested in knowing, and I don't know if this is for another time, or maybe Matt, you can inform me, but how does the school system think about diversity in a classroom in terms of students with similar needs or backgrounds or otherwise? Jacob, oh yeah.
Yeah, that's something that. Yeah, sorry, I was going to just say that's something that we certainly promote. I've heard several messages and read several messages from David McTimoney, our superintendent, to be very conscious of that in our classrooms. But really, each educator takes a good look at their students at the beginning of every year, and I know that they really do try to consider where each student's coming from. And I know many times as a teacher and talking with a lot of teachers is every single day it's trying to make a personal connection with each of those students and to make them feel like they belong in the classroom, they have something to contribute. But each of these educators here on this call, I'm sure, has an excellent different approach for doing that.
Yeah, I'm interested in Jacob's point, right, about I think there's, the inclusive education approach isn't that you group like with like to the exclusion of, right? You want to integrate unique learners into a classroom. But I'd wondered about the theory of, do you put individual unique learners and sprinkle them across multiple classes, or do you think about that we want students to recognize, something familiar or someone familiar in every classroom, because we certainly found that having that buddy or those 2 buddies made a huge difference. And so I don't know whether the school board groups, Indigenous learners into one class, at least to achieve a minimum of 3 before spreading them across. And it applies to interests as well. So there's some things that are probably really hard to screen for, I'm sure, Jacob, to know what students are interested in what, if that's not a visible indicator. But I think for students who often feel alone, particularly in a remote working environment where you are physically alone and you can't connect because you both have the same colored socks or shoes on, finding ways to connect shared interest and then maybe team students up that way for group projects. I think that's some of the learning that John has shared with me, is that keeping folks together in groups of 3 helps them be successful. Oh, Eric, thank you. Yeah, the buddy system. We do the buddy system corporately, so we certainly pair new Plato testers with experienced PQA testers to work as a bit of a buddy or mentor coach. But we've learned that specifically having another Indigenous, learner or buddy who they can sort of express some shared cultural context with has made a big difference. Probably all of us have experienced that feeling of being the only something in the room, whether that's by gender or age or race or geography or otherwise. And so finding that one or other person you consider to be like you really makes a difference when you're learning new things or learning in new models. I also realized I didn't get the chance to talk about Actua at all. Oh, Tammy. Yeah, it's hard if you only have, one student or, who's of a particular cultural background, then really hard to find that connection point. But I do want to shout out just quickly to Actua for those of you who aren't familiar. They are an organization that has member networks across the university. So Worlds Unbound would be a member of the Actua network, if that helps. They learned the importance of training the trainer for the remote education that Actua delivered, and was sending STEM kits into the north and into Nunavut and other places, and then training a local trainer who could deliver some of the programs and leverage some of the hardware and other things when we moved into pandemic mode. So building those community contacts and having that sort of train the trainer connection with somebody who could deliver locally, and enabling them with, it's probably a little bit like the Brilliant Labs model, enabling them with the curriculum, enabling them with the tools and equipment, and being there to support so that they could deliver in community was how Actua managed through the pandemic. Yeah, thanks, Jacob. Well, I'll say happy for anybody to reach out if you want to talk more about either Actua or Plato or what we're trying to do in terms of educating and employing Indigenous people in IT. Would love to chat with any of you. Big thanks to all the teachers who give so much to the students and to our provinces. I know this is an Atlantic conference. I'm very grateful to the amazing educators that my kids have had at Keynote, and it's been a privilege to speak with you today.
Susan, just one special request to put you on the spot, perhaps. This is the last thing you want to hear, but this is a great story, and perhaps as some of these educators find themselves in classrooms and opportunities and leads and all kinds of people on this call, they find opportunities that, oh, I remember what Susan said or what that PQA and Plato is doing. Perhaps it would be really neat to share some of these stories with my students. Are you or any of your staff available to kind of have a call in with students and share some of the work that you're doing and encourage them to do the same?
Yeah, actually, our team in the Miramichi had gone into, I think, middle schools for some career fairs and to start to demonstrate there are Indigenous people in tech and to talk about software testing. And I know our team, particularly here in Fredericton, but also anywhere across the country, would love to talk to young students, particularly young Indigenous students, but really any young student, about being a new IT professional and what it was like to learn software testing without a technical background, and even engage one-on-one with students just as a sharing their career journey and their learning journey. So I know people like Shawnee and a number of our employees would be thrilled to have the chance to engage with hopefully future IT professionals. So please reach out if you think we can make a match between your class or one of your students or a club or group and some of the Plato or PQA employees. I'd love to do that.
Excellent. Thanks. Perhaps you could share with us how someone could contact you, or they could contact you through Jeff or myself.
I'll put my email there in the chat. It's readily available, I think, in all places online, and it's pretty simple, susan.holt@pqa.com or .ca, I should say. But yeah, you can reach out by Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn,